She accidentally signed to the Vampire King's mute son at a royal banquet. The entire hall went silent. What she didn't realize, she was the first person outside his tutor who'd ever spoken his language. And the lonely king watching from his throne would move heaven and earth to keep her there. If you want to hear more stories like this, subscribe to the channel. And please, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? I'd love to know. The crystal goblets caught the candlelight like frozen stars, casting blood-red shadows across marble floors that had witnessed 5 centuries of immortal decadence. Lena's hands trembled as she balanced the silver tray, weaving between lords in velvet cloaks and ladies whose pale skin seemed to drink the darkness rather than reflect it. 3 months working in the palace, and she still wasn't used to the weight of vampire eyes following her every move. Predatory, ancient, assessing her mortality like a fine wine waiting to be uncorked. "More wine for Lord Cassius," hissed the head servant, shoving her toward the high table. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. The high table, where King Aldrich sat. She had seen the Vampire King only from a distance before, a figure carved from marble and shadows, with eyes that could freeze blood in mortal veins. Tonight he wore black armor even at dinner, as if expecting war to break out between the soup and dessert courses. Ancient scars crossed his knuckles, and his crown sat heavy on his brow. Dark metal studded with rubies the color of fresh kills. But it wasn't the king that made her pause. It was the small boy sitting beside him. Prince Alaric couldn't have been older than 7. While nobles laughed and clinked glasses around him, the child sat perfectly still, staring at his untouched plate, as if the world beyond it didn't exist. His dark hair fell across pale cheeks that had never seen sunlight, and his small hands rested in his lap like wounded birds. No one spoke to him. No one even looked at him. The heir to the vampire throne, invisible in plain sight. Lena approached the table, her footsteps silent on polished floors. She reached for the king's empty goblet, her movements careful and rehearsed. "Don't make eye contact. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't—" A servant rushing past knocked her elbow. Time slowed to a crawl. The tray tilted. 3 crystal goblets slid toward the edge, spinning through the air in a cascade of silver and glass. They crashed onto the table directly in front of Prince Alaric, red wine exploding across the white tablecloth like fresh blood. The entire hall went silent. 500 conversations died mid-sentence. Forks froze halfway to immortal mouths. Even the musicians in the corner stopped playing, the final note hanging in the air like a held breath. Lena's knees hit the floor. "Forgive me, Your Majesty. But her eyes found the prince first. Wine had splattered across his sleeve. A shard of crystal rested inches from his small hand. Yet the boy didn't flinch, didn't cry out. He simply stared at the mess with wide dark eyes, the color of midnight trapped in amber, his small body rigid with a fear he couldn't voice. Without thinking, Lena's hands moved. "Are you okay?" She signed it quickly, instinctively, the same way she'd signed to her little brother back in the village before the fever took him. Her fingers formed the familiar shapes. The gesture for you, the concerned expression, the questioning tilt. Prince Alaric's head snapped up. His eyes met hers, truly met them for the first time. They were huge in his small face, and suddenly filled with something that looked like lightning trapped in a bottle. The prince's hands flew up from his lap. "I'm fine," he signed back, his movements sharp with excitement. "You can sign. You know how." His little hands trembled as they formed the words, moving so fast they blurred together. A smile broke across his face, the kind of smile that hadn't seen sunlight in too long. "No one else signs, except teacher. Are you new? What's your name?" Silence. The king's voice cut through the hall like a blade through silk. Every head turned. Every spine straightened. Lena felt the word wrap around her throat like a noose. King Aldrich rose from his throne, unfolding to his full immortal height. He was impossibly tall, with shoulders that blocked out the candlelight behind him. He wasn't looking at Lena. He was looking at his son. Prince Alaric's hands froze mid-sign. The smile slid from his face, replaced by that terrible stillness. The boy's eyes dropped to his lap, and his shoulders curled inward. making him even smaller than he already was. The king's gaze shifted to Lena. She couldn't breathe. His eyes were the color of winter storms, and just as cold. "You," he said quietly. "Stand." Lena's legs barely supported her weight as she rose. Around the hall, nobles whispered behind jeweled hands. She caught fragments of their words, signed to the prince. Never seen him respond to anyone. Just a human servant. How dare she? King Aldrich descended from the platform, each step deliberate. The crowd parted before him like water before a ship's bow. He stopped 3 paces from Lena, close enough that she could see the silver threading through his dark hair, the faint scars on his knuckles that spoke of battles fought before her great-grandparents were born. "Where did you learn that?" His voice was quiet, but it carried through the silent hall like distant thunder. "In my village, Your Majesty." Lena's voice cracked. "My brother was born deaf. I learned to speak with my hands so he wouldn't be alone." The king's expression didn't change. "Your brother. Where is he now?" "Dead, sire. 5 years ago." Something flickered across the king's face. Too quick to name. He glanced back at Prince Alaric, who was watching them with desperate, pleading eyes that seemed too old for such a small face. The nobles waited for judgment. A few looked eager, hoping for entertainment. Others seemed uncomfortable, perhaps remembering their own humanity buried deep beneath centuries of immortal pride. King Aldrich turned to his steward, a thin vampire with silver spectacles who stood near the throne. "Find this woman's name and position. Report to my study within the hour." He returned to his seat without another word. The musicians began playing again, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. Conversations resumed. Servants rushed forward to clean the spilled wine and broken crystal. But Prince Alaric's eyes never left Lena as she was ushered away. His small hands moved one final time, hidden beneath the table where only she could see. "Thank you." The king's private study smelled of old leather and older secrets. Shadows gathered in the corners despite the fire burning in the hearth, as if even light knew better than to push too far into Aldrich's domain. He stood by the window, watching the moon paint silver streaks across the palace gardens. Behind him, his steward waited with the patience of someone who'd served for 3 centuries. "The human waitress," Aldrich said without turning. "What do you know of her?" The steward consulted his leather-bound ledger. "Lena Thorne, Your Majesty. 22 years of age. Arrived from the eastern villages 3 months ago seeking work. Her references indicate reliability. And the sign language? She had a younger brother, sire, born without speech or hearing. She learned to communicate with him before he succumbed to illness." The steward paused. "The village priest taught them both. Apparently it's a language used in certain human monasteries for silent prayer." Aldrich closed his eyes. He had hired 7 tutors for Alaric over the past 2 years. Private instructors who came at dawn and left at dusk, teaching his son to communicate in the language of hands and expressions. But they were paid professionals doing a job. Tonight, he had watched his son smile for the first time in months. Over spilled wine and broken crystal, a human girl had given Alaric something no amount of gold could buy. Someone who spoke to him simply because they could. The boy was animated. Aldrich said quietly, "I've never seen him move his hands so quickly." Prince Alaric seemed quite taken with her, sire. Yes, taken. Such a simple word for the desperate hope that had blazed in his son's eyes. Aldrich had seen that look only once before, the day Alaric's mother died, when the boy had screamed silent screams that no one could hear, his small hands forming words his father couldn't understand. That was the day Aldrich had stopped trying to reach him, not because he didn't love the boy, but because every attempt felt like watching his son drown while standing on the shore, unable to swim. "Assign her to the day shift," Aldrich said, "near the prince's wing." The steward's quill scratched against parchment. "Very good, sire. Shall I inform her of the reason for the transfer?" "No." Aldrich turned from the window. His reflection in the glass looked older than it had that morning. "Let her think it's simply a new assignment. Nothing more. As you wish." The steward bowed and moved toward the door, then hesitated. "Sire, if I may speak freely?" Aldrich nodded once. "Prince Alaric has been alone for a very long time. Perhaps this is not such a terrible accident after all. After the steward left, Aldrich sat at his desk and pulled out a drawer he rarely opened. Inside lay a painted miniature. His late wife, Elena, laughing with infant Alaric in her arms. She'd been human once, before choosing immortality to stay by his side. She would have known what to do. She would have learned the hand language in a week, would have filled their son's silent world with conversation and laughter. But Elena was gone, and Aldrich had an entire kingdom to rule. Wars to plan, treaties to negotiate, 100 crises that demanded his attention every day. Except none of them mattered as much as the small boy who sat alone at banquets, invisible in plain sight. Aldrich's hand moved experimentally, trying to remember the signs he'd glimpsed at dinner. His fingers felt clumsy, awkward. He pulled his hand back, frustrated. Tomorrow. He would deal with this tomorrow. Dawn broke cold and golden over the palace. Lena's hands shook as she balanced the breakfast tray, not from its weight, but from the knowledge of where she was taking it. The prince's courtyard lay at the end of a marble corridor, lined with portraits of stern-faced vampire ancestors. Their painted eyes seemed to follow her, judging, a human servant, walking where few were permitted. She pushed open the iron gate with her hip. The courtyard took her breath away. Night-blooming flowers covered every surface. Moon vines and shadow roses that should have closed with sunrise, but somehow remained open here, their petals luminescent in the early light. A small fountain burbled in the center, its water crystal clear. Stone benches curved beneath a willow tree that wept silver leaves. And there, sitting cross-legged on the grass, was Prince Alaric. He hadn't noticed her yet. His attention was fixed on something in his hands, a small bird's nest cradled carefully in his palms. He was examining it with the serious concentration only children could muster, his dark hair falling into his eyes. Lena set the tray on a nearby table. The soft clink of porcelain made Alaric's head snap up. His eyes widened. Then his whole face transformed, that same brilliant smile from last night breaking across his features like sunrise. "You came," he signed, scrambling to his feet. The bird's nest wobbled dangerously. "I thought maybe I dreamed you. Nobody told me you'd be here. Are you my new breakfast person? What's your name?" His hands moved so fast Lena almost couldn't keep up. She laughed, setting down the teapot before signing back. "Slow down, little prince. Yes, I'm real. My name is Lena." "Lena." He fingerspelled it carefully, learning. "That's a nice name. Can you stay while I eat, please? Teacher doesn't come until after lunch and there's nobody to talk to." He stopped abruptly. His smile faltered, his hands lowered, and that shuddered look returned to his face, the same one from the banquet when his father had spoken. "I'm sorry," he signed, small and quick. "You probably have other work. I shouldn't keep you." Lena's heart cracked. She knelt on the grass beside him, ignoring the dew soaking into her dress. "I have nowhere more important to be than right here." Alaric stared at her. Then slowly, the smile crept back. "Really? Really?" For the next hour, Lena learned more about Prince Alaric than she'd imagined possible. He showed her his collection of interesting stones arranged by color along the garden wall. He explained, through elaborate signs and animated expressions, how he was studying the birds that visited the fountain each morning. A family of sparrows had built a nest in the willow tree, and he'd found this fallen one beneath it. "Do you think they're sad?" he signed, holding up the empty nest. "That they lost their home?" "Maybe," Lena signed back. "But birds are clever. They'll build a new one. I would build them one, but my hands are too big." He looked at his palms sadly. "Well, too big for bird nests. Too small for everything else." "What do you mean?" Alaric hesitated. His hands moved slowly now, carefully. "Father has big hands, warrior hands. He can hold swords and sign treaties and lift heavy things. My hands can only do this." He wiggled his fingers. "Talking that nobody else understands. I understand. You're the only one, except teacher." Alaric sat beside her on the grass. "Do you know what's funny? In the whole palace with hundreds of people, only 2 can hear me, and one of them is paid to." The casual way he said it, as if he'd accepted his isolation as simple fact, Made Lena want to gather him up like the fallen nest and promise to keep him safe. "Well, now you have me," she signed. "And I'm not going anywhere." Alaric's eyes grew suspiciously bright. He nodded quickly, then stood and tugged her hand. "Come on. I want to show you my favorite spot." He led her to the far corner of the courtyard, where the morning light hit just right, making the dew-covered grass sparkle like diamonds scattered by careless gods. He sat down and patted the ground beside him. "This is where I come when I'm sad," he signed. "It's pretty. Pretty things help." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher. A sparrow landed on the fountain's edge, cocked its head at them, then flew away. "Lena," Alaric signed after a while, "can I ask you something? Anything. Why did you help me last night? You could have gotten in trouble. You still might." Lena thought about her answer carefully. "Because you looked scared, and nobody should be scared and alone at the same time." Alaric absorbed this. Then he signed with the blunt honesty of children. "I'm scared and alone a lot." Before Lena could respond, footsteps echoed from the corridor. Both of them turned. A figure stood in the archway, silhouetted against the morning sun. King Aldrich. He wasn't wearing his armor today, just dark clothes that made him look less like a warrior and more like a man. His eyes moved from Lena to his son, then to their hands, frozen mid-conversation. How long had he been watching? Alaric scrambled to his feet, his earlier joy evaporating. He bowed his head, small and formal and perfectly obedient. The king took one step forward. Stopped. His jaw worked as if he wanted to say something, but didn't know how. Finally, he turned and walked away without a word. Alaric sat back down slowly. He didn't sign anything else that morning, just held the bird's nest in his lap and stared at where his father had been standing. Rain hammered against the palace windows like 1,000 impatient fingers. Lena had been delivering breakfast to Alaric's courtyard for 6 days now, and each morning the prince was already waiting for her, usually with something new to show her. A butterfly wing, a perfectly round pebble. Once, a drawing he'd made of the two of them sitting by the fountain. But today, the courtyard was empty. Lena set down the tray, worry gnawing at her stomach. Had something happened? Had the king changed his mind about her assignment? A small hand tugged at her sleeve. She spun around to find Alaric standing behind her, practically vibrating with excitement. His hair was damp from the rain, his clothes spotted with water. "Come with me," he signed urgently. "I want to show you something secret. Prince Alaric, you're soaked. You should... Please." His eyes were huge and pleading. "It's important, and it's inside." How could anyone say no to that face? Alaric grabbed her hand and pulled her through a side door she'd never noticed before, down a narrow servant's passage, then up a spiral staircase that seemed to climb forever. Finally, they emerged into a long hallway lined with tall windows. At the end stood an enormous oak door carved with intricate symbols. The Royal Library. "We can't," Lena signed quickly. "Servants aren't allowed," but Alaric was already pushing the door open. The library was magnificent. Shelves stretched up 3 stories, connected by spiral staircases and narrow bridges. Rain-gray light filtered through stained glass windows, painting the floors in muted rainbows. The smell of old paper and leather hung thick in the air, the scent of centuries preserved. "Isn't it wonderful?" Alaric signed, his face glowing. "Nobody comes here anymore. Father's too busy. The nobles think reading is boring. It's just me and the books." He pulled her toward a low shelf in the corner where oversized picture books sat gathering dust. He selected one with a faded cover showing a castle and a dragon. "These are vampire fairy tales," he signed. "Teacher reads them to me, but I like them better when I tell them myself." He opened the book, and Lena saw that someone, probably a tutor from years past, had added small sign language diagrams in the margins, showing how to sign each important word. Alaric's hands began to move, telling the story. His signing was beautiful, expressive and fluid, painting pictures in the air. He signed about a brave knight and a lonely dragon who couldn't breathe fire, about how everyone feared the dragon because of what he was supposed to be, not who he actually was. Lena found herself drawn into the tale. When Alaric signed the part where the dragon finally roared, not with fire, but with wind that carried flower petals, she acted it out, sweeping her arms wide. Alaric laughed silently, his small shoulders shaking with mirth. "Your turn," he signed, pushing another book into her hands. This one was about a princess who lived in a tower. Lena signed the story, exaggerating her expressions, making Alaric's eyes grow wide at the scary parts and light up during the happy ones. When she signed about the princess dancing alone in her tower, she stood and twirled, nearly knocking over a stack of books. Alaric clapped his hands, not making sound, but the gesture of applause anyway. He jumped up to join her, and they spun together between the bookshelves, the forbidden library transforming into a stage for stories only they could tell. They didn't hear the door open. "Alaric," the king's voice cut through their joy like a blade through silk. Lena's heart stopped. She dropped into a curtsy so fast her knees hit the floor, pain shooting up her legs. Beside her, Alaric froze mid-spin, his arms falling to his sides. King Aldrich stood in the doorway, rain dripping from his dark cloak. His expression was unreadable, carved from stone, revealing nothing. "Forgive me, your majesty," Lena gasped. "I didn't mean to. The prince wanted to show me. I should have refused. Stand." She obeyed, legs trembling. This was it. She'd be dismissed. Possibly worse. But the king wasn't looking at her. He was watching his son. Alaric stood perfectly still, head bowed, waiting for judgment. All the light had gone out of him, replaced by that terrible, resigned stillness. The king stepped into the library. His boots echoed on the marble floor. He walked past Lena, past the scattered books, until he stood directly before Alaric. Then he did something unexpected. He knelt, brought himself down to his son's level, his cloak pooling around him like spilled ink. Alaric's head came up slowly, confusion written across his small face. The king's hand moved, clumsy, uncertain, forming a single sign, one Lena recognized from their morning conversations, though Alaric couldn't know that. Happy. It was rough, the fingers not quite right, but the meaning was clear. "You look happy." Alaric's eyes went wide. His mouth opened in a silent gasp. The king looked at Lena then, and she saw something in his expression she hadn't expected. Not anger, not suspicion, desperation. "Stay," he said quietly. "Continue." He moved to a chair near the window, far enough to give them space, close enough to watch. He didn't pick up a book or pretend to work. He simply sat and observed. After a long moment of shock, Alaric slowly picked up the storybook again. His hands trembled as he began to sign, and his father watched his son speak, and though he couldn't understand most of it, he didn't look away, not once. The whispers started small, like poison seeping through cracks. "Did you hear? The human girl spends hours alone with the prince. In the library of all places. Completely inappropriate. The king allows it. Can you imagine?" Lena heard the rumors in the servants' hall, in the corridors, even in the kitchen where she collected Alaric's breakfast each morning. The other servants no longer met her eyes. Some looked at her with envy, others with pity. Mari pulled her aside one evening, her face pale. "They're saying you've bewitched the prince, that you're using him to get close to power. That's ridiculous. He's 7 years old. Lena, listen to me." Mari gripped her shoulders. "Lord Cassius spoke to the council yesterday. He said it's unseemly for a human servant to have such influence over the heir. He called you a security risk. A security risk. For teaching a lonely child to smile." But the noble's opinions didn't truly frighten Lena. What frightened her was the look on Alaric's face when she was 10 minutes late to breakfast one morning. The panic in his eyes, the way his hands had trembled when he signed, "I thought they made you leave." She was becoming important to him. Too important. And that made her vulnerable. The summons came on a gray afternoon. "Lord Chancellor Valerius requests your presence in the East Solar." A guard informed her, his expression carefully neutral. Lena's stomach dropped. The Lord Chancellor was the king's chief advisor, second only to Aldrich himself in authority. His word could end her career, or her life. The East Solar was a cold room despite the fire burning in its hearth. Lord Valerius stood by the window, his back to her. He was an ancient vampire, thin as a blade, with silver hair pulled back in a severe knot. "Miss Thorne." He didn't turn around. "Do you know why I've called you here?" "No, my lord." "I think you do." Now he turned, and his eyes were like chips of ice. "You've been seen spending considerable time with Prince Alaric. Time that exceeds your duties as a breakfast server. The prince enjoys having someone to talk to, my lord." "The prince," Valerius interrupted, "is the heir to the vampire throne. His companions should be carefully selected from noble families, not plucked from the servant class on a whim." Lena's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "With respect, my lord, those noble families don't speak his language. A temporary limitation. The boy will outgrow this affliction. He'll learn to communicate properly, like any other royal. He already communicates properly, just not in the way you understand." The words escaped before Lena could stop them. Valerius's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You forget yourself, girl." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Let me be clear. There are members of this court who believe Prince Alaric is unsuitable as heir. They see his silence as weakness, a liability." Lena's blood ran cold. "They want to replace him. They want a strong successor. One who can address the council, negotiate with foreign dignitaries, command respect." Valerius moved closer, circling her like a predator. "Your presence complicates matters. You make the prince comfortable in his isolation. You enable his refusal to adapt. I help him feel less alone. You help him remain helpless." Valerius stopped in front of her. "The kindest thing you could do for Prince Alaric is distance yourself. Let him struggle. Let him learn to survive in a world that won't sign back to him. That's cruel. That's reality." Valerius's expression softened slightly. Or perhaps it was a trick of the candlelight. "I'm not a monster, Miss Thorne. I've served this kingdom for 4 centuries. I've seen weak rulers destroy nations. Prince Alaric needs to be strong, not coddled." He walked to his desk and pulled out a sealed letter. "This is a transfer order. You'll be reassigned to the South Wing, effective immediately. Better wages, lighter duties. You'll never have to see the prince again." Lena stared at the letter as if it were a snake. "And if I refuse? Then you'll be dismissed entirely. No references. No final wages." Valerius set the letter down between them. "Take the night to consider. But understand, this is not a negotiation. It's mercy." Lena went to the courtyard the next morning, her heart heavy as stone. She'd spent all night wrestling with the decision. Take the transfer and save her livelihood, or refuse and lose everything. But when she saw Alaric waiting by the fountain, her choice became clear. He knew immediately something was wrong. "What happened?" he signed, rushing over. "You look sad." "I'm fine, little prince." "You're lying." His small face was fierce. "Your hands are doing the thing they do when you're upset. All stiff. Did I do something wrong?" Alaric's signs grew smaller, more hesitant. "I can be quieter during our lessons. I won't ask you to stay so long. Please don't be angry with me." "Oh, sweetheart, no." Lena knelt and took his hands in hers. "You did nothing wrong. Nothing." Then what? How could she explain that his world was full of people who saw him as a problem to be solved? That they wanted her gone because she made him happy? "Some people think I spend too much time with you." She signed carefully. Alaric's face crumpled. "Father? No, other people. People who don't understand. They never understand." The resignation in those small hands broke her heart. "It's okay. You can go. Everyone leaves eventually." The casual acceptance in his signs, as if abandonment was just another fact of life, like rain or sunrise, made Lena's decision for her. "I'm not going anywhere," she signed fiercely. "Do you hear me? I'm staying." "But you said—" "I don't care what they say. You're my friend. Friends don't leave." Alaric stared at her. Then he threw his arms around her neck and held on tight, his small body shaking with silent sobs. She held him, this lonely prince who'd been invisible for so long, and made a promise she hoped she could keep. "We'll face this together," she signed when he finally pulled back. "Okay?" Alaric nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Then he signed something that made her heart crack wide open. Nobody ever stayed before. Not after they knew it was hard. "Well, I'm not nobody, Lena signed. I'm me, and I'm not afraid of hard. A small smile crept back onto his face, fragile, but real. They spent the rest of the morning in the courtyard, and Alaric stayed close to her, as if afraid she might disappear if he looked away too long. He showed her his stones, his bird's nest, all the small treasures he'd collected, each one shared like a gift, like proof that she was still there, still real, still choosing him. Neither of them saw the figure watching from the balcony above. King Aldrich stood in the shadows, having arrived to observe his son's lessons as had become his habit. But he'd stopped cold when he'd heard Lena speak of threats, of people wanting her gone. Valeria's. It had to be. His old friend, his trusted advisor, trying to drive away the one person who'd brought light back into Alaric's eyes. Aldrich watched his son cling to the human girl, watched the way she held him without hesitation, without calculation. She had nothing to gain from this attachment. No political advantage, no path to power. Just a lonely child who needed someone to see him, and she'd chosen to stay, knowing it would cost her. The king's hands gripped the balcony railing hard enough that the stone cracked beneath his fingers. For years he'd told himself that distance was kindness, that giving Alaric space to adapt, to grow stronger without dependence, was the right choice. But watching his son now, seeing the desperate way he clung to someone who offered simple, unconditional presence, Aldrich had been wrong. Alaric didn't need to be hardened. He needed to be seen. And this mortal girl, this servant with nothing but compassion and courage, had understood what an entire court of ancient vampires could not. His son had found someone willing to fight for him, and Aldrich would be damned to every hell that existed before he let anyone take that away. He turned from the balcony, his cloak billowing behind him like storm clouds gathering, and strode toward the council chambers. Valeria's wanted to play politics with his son's happiness? The vampire king would remind him exactly who ruled this kingdom, and it wasn't the Lord Chancellor. The knock on Alaric's chamber door came after midnight. The prince sat cross-legged on his bed, arranging his collection of stones by moonlight. He'd long since given up trying to sleep at normal hours. The silence of night felt less lonely than the silence of day. When the door opened, Alaric looked up, expecting his night guard. Instead, his father stood in the doorway. King Aldrich seemed too large for the frame, his broad shoulders nearly touching both sides. He still wore his council clothes, though he'd removed his crown. Without it, he looked different, tired, almost human. Alaric froze. A smooth river stone clutched in his hand. His father never came to his chambers. They saw each other at formal dinners, at council presentations where Alaric sat silent and decorative, at occasions that required the heir's presence. But never here. Never in this private space that belonged only to Alaric. The king stepped inside and closed the door. "Good evening, father," Alaric signed formally, setting down his stones and sliding off the bed to bow. Aldrich held up a hand. "Wait." His throat worked as if the words were stuck there. "May I sit?" Alaric nodded, confused. His father never asked permission for anything. The king lowered himself into the chair by Alaric's desk. A small chair meant for a child, making him look almost comical, like a bear trying to fit into a dollhouse. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and for a long moment simply looked at his son. Alaric shifted uncomfortably under the scrutiny. His hands moved nervously. "Did I do something wrong?" "No." Aldrich's voice was rough. "No, you did nothing wrong." Silence stretched between them. Alaric's fingers twitched, wanting to sign, to fill the emptiness with words his father wouldn't understand. But he kept his hands still, waiting. "I've been thinking," Aldrich said finally, "about your mother." Alaric's eyes widened. They never spoke about her, not since she died. She would have known what to do, what to say. The king's hands clenched into fists. She was good at talking, at connecting. I'm good at war, at strategy, at breaking things. He looked at his scarred knuckles. But not this. Not... What? Alaric signed before he could stop himself. His father stared at the hand movements, and Alaric saw frustration flash across his face. The same frustration Alaric felt every day, trying to exist in a world that wouldn't speak his language. That, Aldrich said quietly. Not that. He stood abruptly and began pacing. The small room made him seem like a caged animal. I've conquered kingdoms, negotiated peace treaties in 5 languages, commanded armies of thousands. He stopped, his back to Alaric. But I can't. His voice cracked. I can't talk to my own son. Alaric's chest tightened. He'd never heard his father sound like this. Lost, vulnerable, almost desperate. The king turned to face him. You move your hands so fast with Lena. In the library, in the courtyard. I watch you and it's like you're speaking in lightning and I... He held up his own hands, large and calloused. I understand nothing. I could teach you. Alaric signed eagerly, hope blooming in his chest. It's not hard. Just shapes and... But his father wasn't looking at his hands. Couldn't read the offer being made. Alaric's hands fell to his sides. Aldrich saw the movement, the disappointment. Something seemed to break in his expression. He crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt before his son. The second time in 2 weeks he'd lowered himself to Alaric's level. Show me, he said. 1 sign. Just 1. For son. Alaric's breath caught. Slowly, he raised his hand and demonstrated a simple gesture. Fingers pointed at himself, then swept outward. Aldrich copied it, clumsy and uncertain. His fingers didn't quite match the shape. Alaric took his father's hand, so much larger than his own, and gently adjusted the position. His father's skin was warm, rougher than he'd expected. He couldn't remember the last time they'd touched like this. Like this. He signed with his free hand. Aldrich repeated the gesture, and this time it was almost right. Alaric nodded enthusiastically. Then he showed him another sign. Father. It was more complex. A hand to the forehead, then brought down to the chest. Protective. Strong. Aldrich practiced it 3 times before getting it right. When he finally did, he looked at Alaric with an expression the prince had never seen before. Pride, maybe. Or relief. Say something to me, Aldrich whispered. Please. Alaric's hands moved, forming the signs his father had just learned. His movements were slow, deliberate. My son. 2 words. Simple. Imperfect. Everything. Alaric's eyes flooded with tears. He launched himself at his father, wrapping his small arms around the king's neck. Aldrich caught him, held him, one large hand cradling the back of his son's head. They stayed like that for a long time in the moonlit chamber, neither of them signing or speaking, just holding on. When Aldrich finally pulled back, his eyes were suspiciously bright. Tomorrow, he said, after council. Will you teach me more? Will your friend, will Lena teach me? Alaric nodded so hard his whole body shook. Good night, my son. Aldrich signed as he stood at the door, his hands uncertain but deliberate. Good night, father. Alaric signed back. After the king left, Alaric climbed back into bed and stared at the ceiling, his heart racing. For the first time in 5 years, since his mother died and his world went silent, he let himself believe in something he'd thought lost forever. Hope. The council chamber fell silent as King Aldrich entered, his presence filling the room like an approaching storm. The ancient vampires seated around the obsidian table exchanged glances. Something was different about their king today. The spring procession, Aldrich announced without preamble, will take place as scheduled in 3 days' time. Of course, your majesty, Lord Valerius replied smoothly. All preparations are underway. The traditional ceremony will include my son. The room erupted. Your majesty, with all due respect, the prince has never participated. It would be highly irregular. Aldrich's hand came down on the table with enough force to crack the stone. Silence fell like a guillotine blade. Prince Alaric will stand beside me on the royal balcony, he continued, his voice deadly calm. And Miss Lena Thorne will accompany us as his interpreter. If the first announcement had caused shock, this one detonated like a bomb. Lord Cassius rose from his seat, his face twisted with indignation. A human servant? On the royal balcony? Interpreting for the heir? This is madness. This is my decision, Aldrich said coldly. Your Majesty, Valerius interjected, his tone careful. The prince cannot address the people directly. It will be awkward for everyone involved. The boy will be... My son, Aldrich interrupted, is the heir to this throne. It is time the kingdom saw him, not as a silent shadow, but as their prince. But he's mute, Lord Cassius sputtered. He can't even speak. How can he possibly... He speaks perfectly. The king's eyes blazed with an anger that made even ancient vampires flinch. You simply haven't bothered to learn his language. Your Majesty, Valerius tried again. We understand your paternal feelings, but the prince's condition makes him unsuitable for public appearances. The people expect strength, authority. My son has more strength than anyone in this room. Aldrich's voice was soft now, which somehow made it more terrifying. He faces every day in a world that refuses to see him, and still he finds reasons to smile. That is the kind of strength this kingdom needs. He swept his gaze across the council table, daring anyone to challenge him. For years, I've allowed you to hide him away, to treat his silence as something shameful, to whisper that he's unfit to rule. His hands clenched into fists. No more. My son will take his place beside me, and the kingdom will learn what I should have taught them from the beginning. That different does not mean less. The nobles will never accept it, Cassius warned. There are already those who question the succession. This will only fuel their arguments that Prince Alaric should be replaced. Then let them argue. Aldrich leaned forward, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. And let them remember that I am still king. Anyone who challenges my son's right to the throne challenges me directly. The threat hung in the air like a drawn sword. Valerius studied the king for a long moment, then slowly inclined his head. As you command, Your Majesty, though I hope you understand the risk you're taking. Not just politically, but for the boy himself. If this goes poorly, it won't. Aldrich straightened. Because for the first time, my son won't face the world alone. He'll have his father beside him, and someone brave enough to be his voice. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Miss Thorne's transfer order is hereby voided. She is to be assigned permanently to the royal household as Prince Alaric's companion and interpreter. Anyone who has a problem with that may bring their concerns directly to me. The door closed behind him, with a finality that echoed through the chamber. In the silence that followed, Lord Cassius turned to Valerius. He's making a terrible mistake. The prince will be humiliated. The kingdom will see weakness. Or, Valerius interrupted quietly, staring at the door where the king had departed. They'll see a father fighting for his son, and there's nothing more powerful than that. The morning of the spring procession dawned cold and golden, the sky bleeding amber and crimson like ancient prophecies written in light. Lena's hands shook so badly she could barely lace her dress. A new one, deep midnight blue with silver threading that caught the light like captured starlight. Appropriate for the balcony, the king's steward had said, as if it were perfectly normal for a servant to stand beside royalty. Mari helped pin Lena's hair, her fingers gentle but trembling. You look terrified. I am terrified. Lena stared at her reflection. What if I make a mistake? What if I can't translate fast enough? What if you help a little boy be seen by his kingdom for the first time? Mari squeezed her shoulders. You've got this. In his chambers, Alaric was equally nervous. He stood before the mirror in formal attire, a small version of his father's ceremonial robes, black and silver with the royal crest embroidered on the chest. He looked like a prince from a storybook, but his hands wouldn't stop trembling. His father entered without knocking, also dressed in full regalia. Crown, cape, the ancient sword of the realm at his hip. He looked every inch the warrior king, until he saw his son's fear and immediately knelt. Scared? He signed. His signing had improved dramatically over the past 3 weeks of daily lessons with Lena. Alaric nodded, not trusting himself to sign back. Me too, Aldrich signed, and Alaric's eyes widened in surprise. His father, scared? The king smiled, a rare, genuine expression. But we'll be scared together, and Lena will be there. You trust her? Yes. Then trust this. Aldrich's hands moved slowly, making sure his son understood. You deserve to be seen, not hidden like something broken. But I am broken, Alaric signed, his small hands heavy with resignation. I can't speak like you. Aldrich caught his son's hands in his own. You speak perfectly. The world just needs to learn your language. He said it aloud, then signed it, imperfect but heartfelt. The grand balcony overlooked the main courtyard where thousands had gathered, humans and vampires alike, dressed in spring colors, carrying lanterns even in daylight as tradition demanded. The crowd stretched as far as the eye could see, an ocean of faces waiting for their king. Lena stood to the side as the royal family emerged. The king first, majestic and commanding. Then Alaric, so small beside his father, his face pale but determined. The crowd erupted in cheers. But as they noticed the young prince, many seeing him clearly for the first time, the sound faltered, confused whispers rippling through the assembly. Aldrich raised his hand for silence. His voice carried across the courtyard, amplified by ancient acoustics built into the palace walls. My people, today, my son joins me not as a shadow, but as your prince. He gestured to Alaric, who stepped forward with all the courage his small body could muster. The boy's hands began to move. Lena's voice rang out clear and strong, translating, I know I am different. I know I cannot speak as you do, but I can listen. Alaric's signs grew more confident. I can care. I can learn. And when I am king, I will remember what it feels like to be unseen, to be misunderstood, to be judged for what I cannot do rather than what I can. A murmur swept through the crowd. I may not have a voice, Lena continued, her words carrying Alaric's heart, but I have hands, and I hope that one day you'll learn to hear them. For a moment, nothing happened. The crowd stood frozen, thousands of faces staring up at the small prince who dared to be different. Then, from somewhere in the middle of the crowd, a single hand rose. An elderly woman, making a clumsy sign. The one for, we see you. Then another hand. And another. Like ripples spreading across a pond, hands began to rise throughout the courtyard. Nobles and servants, vampires and humans, all attempting the signs they'd watched the prince make. Imperfect, uncertain, beautiful. Alaric's eyes filled with tears as he watched his kingdom speak his language. His father's hand came to rest on his shoulder, and when Alaric looked up, King Aldrich was smiling, truly smiling, with pride shining in his ancient eyes. The silent prince had finally been heard, and the kingdom was listening. That evening, as twilight bled purple and gold across the palace windows, Lena followed a summons to Prince Alaric's chambers. She expected to find the boy exhausted from the day's events, perhaps needing comfort after such an overwhelming public appearance. Instead, she found both father and son waiting for her. King Aldrich stood by the window, still in his ceremonial attire, though he'd removed his crown. Alaric sat on his bed, surrounded by picture books, his eyes bright with an emotion Lena had never seen before. Not just happiness, but belonging. Father wants to tell me a bedtime story, Alaric signed to her, his hands dancing with excitement. With his hands. He asked if you'd help him. Lena's throat tightened. Your Majesty, I would be honored. The king approached, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked uncertain. Not as a warrior or ruler, but as a father attempting something he'd never done before. I never read to him, Aldrich said quietly, settling into the chair beside Alaric's bed. Not after Elena died. I didn't know how to bridge the silence between us. He looked at his son with such raw vulnerability that Lena had to look away. Tonight I'd like to try. Alaric selected a book, the one about the lonely dragon who couldn't breathe fire, and handed it to his father. What followed was something Lena would remember for the rest of her life. King Aldrich, the feared vampire king who'd conquered kingdoms and commanded armies, stumbled through a children's fairy tale with his hands. His signing was clumsy, imperfect. He had to pause frequently, looking to Lena for help with difficult words. Sometimes he got the signs backwards or couldn't remember the right gesture. But Alaric didn't care. The boy watched his father with such complete, radiant joy that the room seemed to glow with it. When Aldrich signed about the dragon learning to roar with wind instead of fire, Alaric clapped silently. When the king's hands fumbled over a difficult passage, Alaric gently corrected him, their hands touching in the space between them, teaching and learning, giving and receiving. By the time the story ended, both of them were crying. Aldrich pulled his son into his arms, holding him the way he should have been holding him for years. "I love you," he signed against Alaric's hair, one of the first phrases Lena had taught him. "I'm sorry it took me so long to say it. You're here now." Alaric signed back. "That's what matters." Lena wiped her own tears, turning to give them privacy. But Aldrich's voice stopped her. "Miss Thorne, stay, please. You're part of this." She turned back, and the king was looking at her with something like gratitude, deep and genuine and earned through weeks of patience and courage. "Tomorrow," Aldrich said, "I'm issuing a royal decree. Sign language will be taught throughout the palace, in the schools, in every corner of the kingdom." His jaw set with determination. No child will ever feel invisible again. No parent will ever be unable to speak to their son. He stood, keeping one hand on Alaric's shoulder. This kingdom has lived for centuries in the darkness, believing that strength means conformity. That difference is weakness. His eyes found Lena's. "A human servant with nothing but compassion taught me what all my power and immortality could not. That true strength is reaching across the silence to find connection." "Father," Alaric signed, his small face serious. "Can Lena stay? As part of our family?" "She already is," Aldrich replied aloud, then signed it carefully so his son could understand. "She already is." That night, after Alaric finally fell asleep, smiling, for once, instead of alone, King Aldrich walked Lena to the door. "Thank you," he said simply, "for seeing him when no one else would, for staying when it would have been easier to leave, for teaching an old vampire that it's never too late to learn a new language." "He's worth it," Lena replied. "He always was. I know that now." The king's expression softened. "Because you showed me." 6 months had passed since the spring procession, and the royal library looked different now. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, painting rainbow patterns across floors that had once gathered only dust. The shelves that had stood silent and forgotten now hummed with quiet activity. Dozens of people filled the space. Nobles in fine clothes sitting beside servants in simple tunics. Ancient vampires learning alongside mortal children, all of them watching the small figure at the front of the room. Prince Alaric stood before them, no longer the invisible boy who'd hidden in shadows. He wore his formal robes with confidence now, and his hands moved through the air like a conductor leading an orchestra. "Good morning," he signed, and the crowd echoed the gesture back to him. Some smoothly, others still fumbling, but all of them trying. Lena stood to the side, translating when needed, but more often simply watching. This was Alaric's class, his kingdom, his language being shared with those who'd once ignored him. "Today, we'll learn the signs for family," Alaric continued, his expression serious but warm, because family isn't just blood. It's everyone who chooses to stay. His eyes found Lena's as he signed it, and she smiled. At the back of the library, partially hidden by a bookshelf, King Aldrich sat in his usual spot. He attended every class, every single one, sometimes in full regalia after council meetings, sometimes in simple clothes when he managed to steal an hour from his endless duties. He was still learning, still imperfect. But his hands moved with growing confidence as he practiced alongside his subjects, just another student in his son's classroom. Lord Valerius stood in the doorway, observing. The old chancellor had opposed this initiative at first, calling it impractical, a waste of resources. But even he couldn't deny the change that had swept through the kingdom. The servants who'd once whispered about the mute prince now greeted him in his own language. The nobles who'd questioned his fitness to rule watched him command a room full of eager students with nothing but his hands and his heart. Foreign dignitaries now requested sign language interpreters for their visits, impressed by a kingdom that valued inclusion over tradition. And most importantly, the lonely child who'd once believed himself broken now stood before his people, not despite his differences, but because of them. "Can someone show me the sign for hope?" Alaric asked the class. A dozen hands went up. including his father's. Alaric pointed to a small human girl in the front row, maybe 5 years old. She stood proudly and demonstrated the sign, hands curved like holding something precious, then opening toward the sky as if releasing a bird. Perfect. Alaric signed, his smile radiant. That's exactly right. After class, as students filed out with promises to practice, Aldrich approached his son. Over the past months, they'd developed their own rhythm. Breakfast together in the courtyard, lessons in the library, quiet evenings where Alaric taught his father new signs, and Aldrich shared stories of the kingdom's history. You did well today, the king signed. His movements were still slower than his son's, but they carried weight and meaning. I had a good teacher, Alaric signed back, glancing at Lena. You had two, Aldrich corrected, pulling both of them into an embrace. His son on one side, the woman who'd saved them both on the other. Outside the library windows, the kingdom continued its daily life, but something fundamental had shifted. In the markets, vendors signed to deaf customers. In the schools, children learned 2 languages from birth. In the palace halls, no one was invisible anymore. The silent prince had found his voice, and an entire kingdom had learned to listen. That evening, as twilight painted the palace in shades of amber and shadow, Alaric stood at his favorite spot in the courtyard, the corner where dewdrops caught the dying light like fallen stars. His father joined him, and together, they watched the night bloom. Father, Alaric signed. Do you think Mother would be proud? Aldrich was quiet for a long moment. Then his hands moved, slow and deliberate. She would be more than proud. She would be amazed. At what? At you. At the king you're going to be. The ancient vampire's eyes shone with emotion. You've already changed this kingdom more than I have in 5 centuries. Not through conquest or power, but through courage. Through refusing to be invisible. I wasn't brave, Alaric signed. I was just lonely, and you turned that loneliness into connection. That's the bravest thing I've ever seen. Father and son stood together as darkness fell, their hands speaking volumes in the gathering night. Behind them, through the library windows, lamplight glowed warm and golden, a beacon for all those who'd once felt unseen, unheard, unloved. The vampire king had learned that strength wasn't about power or immortality. It was about reaching across the silence to find connection. And the mute prince had learned that sometimes the quietest voices carry the loudest truths. In a kingdom of eternal darkness, they had found light. Together,